Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I am covering Season 1, Episode 4, Male-Unbonding. Hey, how's everyone doing? I hope everyone's doing well. I'm doing okay. I got the second shot of the Pfizer vaccine since I last recorded, and it's been fine. I feel great. I did not get any of the adverse symptoms that people talked about. I'll admit I was really nervous to get the second shot because I didn't want to feel crappy and I'd heard so many things about feeling achy or getting chills or having a fever. But I also figured I'm a woman and every month I go through more than a couple of days of feeling like shit. So I knew I could handle it. But at the same time, I was like, well, I just hope I don't get those symptoms. And a couple of days before I got the second shot, I actually happened upon some advice from a couple friends who basically said they had gotten their second shot and they had kind of pumped themselves full of electrolytes the day before and the day of their second shots. And they didn't really experience any of those adverse symptoms. So I figured, what's the harm in trying that? So I went to Walgreens and I got some Pedialyte powdered packets. It was strawberry lemonade, and not my favorite flavor, to be honest, but that was all that was on the shelf. And I did what they said. The day before I drink water all day long. I live in Colorado. You just have to drink a lot of water at this altitude, but I just do it in general anyway because it makes me feel better to stay hydrated. So I just added some Pedialyte packets to my water the day before, the day of. And I have to say, I didn't really feel any symptoms. Now, was it because of the Pedialyte? I don't know, but it was a little trick that I was willing to try because what's the harm in it? So I really felt fine after the second shot, except for, just some soreness at the injection site, which is pretty normal. I just feel so lucky. I just feel great that I'm vaccinated, and I'm hoping everyone does it. Get vaccinated, people. Let's get back to some kind of normalcy. Let's open up stuff again. Let's go to concerts and theaters and traveling. Let's do it. And you know what? The way to do that is to get vaccinated. Do it. It's free. There's no excuse. All right. Stepping down from the soapbox now. Other than that, I've been watching some great shows on TV. I'm trying not to do what I've done with music, which is, it's happened. I can't listen to current music. It's not current music's fault. It's me. It's not you. It's me. I'll just use George's line. I've tried. I just don't enjoy it. There's things I can mildly enjoy, but for the most part, I can't do it. So I go back to my new wave roots. My favorite band is Depeche Mode, and I love all that kind of music from that era, from the 80s. So New Order, Erasure. But with TV, movies, I love to stay pretty current with all of that and watch things that are pretty popular. One of the things I'm watching is Selena, the series that's on Netflix right now. And it's a series that is about Selena Quintanilla, who we all know was tragically murdered back in the 90s. And it's good. I mean, I really enjoy it. It's such a fascinating and tragic story, and it really does drive home what a tragedy it was that she got murdered at the cusp of her really making it big in the United States. I am kind of at the point in the series where I just wanted to get to where she's murdered. I know that sounds really bad, but it's kind of stagnating in the middle. So I'm just like, okay, so let's move this along. Although the build up to the murder, they're doing a really good job with. So I'm enjoying Selena, the series. I've just started watching Mayor of Easttown. Wow. It's on HBO Max or just HBO. I don't know. There's so many HBO offshoots, right? There's HBO Go, there's regular HBO, there's HBO Max. I think there's another one I can't even think about. But anyway, it's on some version of HBO, and wow, it is so good. Kate Winslet. There's nothing that woman can't do. She's pretty amazing in that. And it's a great story. It's kind of a mystery type murder mystery series, and I'm really enjoying that. Handmaid's Tale's back on Hulu. Where I am with this series, it's feeling very familiar to me how I felt about The Walking Dead, where it was like I was so into it, but it's feeling a little bit like the writers are running out of ideas. I'm still watching it. I still want to follow along and see what happens and see where they take the stories. I do think they have a lot of opportunity to make it amazing with what they've laid down as the foundation thus far, but I'm kind of just watching it in anticipation that it's going to get better. And other than that, Top Chef is back. I love Top Chef. I've been watching Top Chef since the beginning. I believe they're in season, I think it's 18 now. I might be wrong, but it's around there. And I love that show. I love reality shows that display people's talent, and not average talent, like exceptional talent. And that's that's why I like Project Runway. I love Top Chef. So that has been on and I'm enjoying that as well. I hope you guys are watching some great stuff as well, not just your Seinfeld reruns. I know you guys do that. I do that as well. Whenever I start cooking dinner, I just put Seinfeld on in the background. It's just comforting to have as the soundtrack of my cooking. All right, let's get into the episode, Male-Unbonding. So reading the synopsis from my coffee table book. Jerry tries to break up with his obnoxious childhood friend, Joel Hornick. Hornick's pathetic weeping leads Jerry to promise Joel he'll still be friends with him. Jerry's ex-girlfriend Elaine helps Jerry come up with excuses he can use to avoid Joel. Kramer tries to get investors for his idea to start a pizza place where customers can make their own pizzas. This episode is written by Jerry and Larry, and it feels like it. I mentioned in the last episode that it was not written by Jerry and Larry. It was the robbery, and it was one of those things where you could just tell right away. So we're back to Jerry and Larry writing it. This is the first episode that Julia Louis-Dreyfus filmed. And this intended to be the intro episode for Elaine until they decided to move the stakeout up in the running order, because it really did introduce Elaine much more thoroughly. And it was a great move because Elaine has only one scene in this episode. One scene! And I'll dive into that more later. But because she only has one scene, I will be covering a little bit of the non-Elaine scenes so that this episode of Hot and Heavy is not like 10 minutes long. All right, so just kind of going over the episode in general, the premise is so much better than the robbery. It's just so much better. I was really negative in the last episode, and I kind of had a panic moment a couple of days before releasing it because I'm generally a really positive person, and I was listening to the episode I'd recorded over and over and going, my God, I'm so down on this episode. And so that was a little bit of a struggle, but then I just decided, hey, you know what? This is how I feel about it, and I did not get any opinions to the contrary, so I'm going to release it with all this negativity. But with this episode, the idea of a man breaking up a friendship with another man is just genius, and it feels so Seinfeld. It's so on brand. And when I compare it to the robbery scenario could have happened to anyone. It could have happened on any show. But this, a man breaking up with another man as a friend, feels so Seinfeld to me. Two people wanting the same apartment, that could have been Joey and Chandler on Friends. So this to me felt so on brand with Seinfeld. Kevin Dunn as Joel Hornick, oh my goodness, such a strong performance. First of all, he plays the jerk so convincingly. I mean, I feel like I've met at least 12 of these types of guys who are so up their own asses that they don't even care. I was going to say they don't realize they're being assholes, but no, I think they completely realize they're being assholes and they just don't care that they're assholes. But he plays that so perfectly well. And then when he flips to sobbing and breaking down because he's so heartbroken that Jerry says this isn't working, I completely believe that too. And that is not an easy performance to pull off in such a convincing way like he does. It was fantastic. He is so perfect for this role. Some comments on Jerry's performance in this scene. Jerry Seinfeld has mentioned in interviews that, well, first of all, he's pretty open that he's definitely not a great actor. But he also mentions that he often felt like he would forget he was in a scene because he was acting with such talented people. And so he sort of became this audience member while in a scene acting. And I know he probably meant that with mostly the other principal cast members, Jason Alexander, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and Michael Richards. But this scene with Kevin Dunn, I think, is one of those times. Jerry looks like he's going to break, first of all, a lot in this scene. And he takes these longer pauses. He seems a little bit distracted by Kevin Dunn's performance, and you can't blame him. But I always remember Jerry saying that in an interview about just feeling like, oh my gosh, I had the best seat in the house. I was so lucky. I was in scenes with some of the best actors I've ever seen. And I had to remind myself, oh my God, you have to be present as an actor versus an audience member. So I really did feel like I saw Jerry kind of just enjoying it from his vantage point. At Monk's, the waitress who Joel yells at is played by Anita Wise. She's the same actress from the previous episode who gets the apartment, who has that voice, that baby voice. I figured I should give some background on her and just not make fun of her voice. But there wasn't really too much on IMDb about her. It does mention that she was an improv actress for pretty much her whole career. But other than that, there really wasn't too much. But that was Anita Wise. I think she's perfectly fine. She does a great job as the waitress, and she just happens to have a voice that I very much enjoy. Kevin Dunn is the sister of Nora Dunn. Just some trivia. I think I did know that, but just something I'd forgotten, some forgotten trivia. Nora Dunn was a cast member on Saturday Night Live in the 80s, and she famously quit when they booked Andrew Dice Clay as a guest host. And I do remember when that happened. I was pretty young, but I remember even being young and kind of being like, well, that's good. I was never a fan of Andrew Dice Clay. I loved comedy. Ever since I was little, even stand up. But there was something, it felt very personal with Andrew Dice Clay because he would really put down foreigners, and my parents were foreigners. Yeah, it felt very personally attacking my family when he would do his comedy. And it was all shtick. I understand why people do like that. I think I like that in different ways with other comedians. But so she quit SNL in protest when he was booked as the guest host. And Nora, I do not blame you. And your brother is super talented. George's storyline in this episode is he's grappling with the fact that he told a woman he liked her and just can't help but think this was a terrible move. This is a theme for George. He doesn't want women who he's dating to know that he likes them. It's such a bizarre way of thinking, but this happens more in the future with George, as we know. I do love that Jerry calls him out on his fanny pack in the first scene because it was distracting that he was wearing that. I love that he said, "It looks like your belt is digesting a small animal." It definitely did. Fanny packs. And they're coming back. I don't get it. This is such great writing. And I'm going to say it again, and I apologize. I'll be redundant with this, I know. But this is Jerry and Larry's voice. I love when you can really feel the Seinfeldian quality, I just made that word up, to an episode. And this felt like that. The scene where George is recounting what happened and how, just distraught he is over telling her that he likes her. But he tells the whole story of what happened. And I couldn't help but be reminded of something I've learned in improv, where you don't talk about something that's happened in the past, you show it. And I know that's improv and this is a scripted show, but the reason I bring that up is because this is a great example of George telling a story about something that happened for I think it's over 2 minutes. This scene goes on with him recounting what happened. But because the combination of Jason Alexander being such a great actor, coupled with the incredible specificity of many details of the story he's telling, it really works. Specificity is something that is so important with writing, with performing, any kind of storytelling. I think specificity is something that I always try and make sure is ever present because it just enriches whatever you're doing. When I really fell in love with writing and storytelling, it was back in junior high. My English teacher, Mrs. Lee, she would always ask for more specifics. She'd ask for more details. She said, make the reader feel like they can feel, taste, and smell everything you're describing. And I think that's invaluable advice for any kind of writer, even a screenwriter. So whether you're describing the setting or having a character monologue, specificity is a tool that should always be used. And this scene of George telling this story, this reminded me of the importance of specificity. And how many times can I say specificity? But anyway, that's your writing lesson for today that you did not ask for. I'm just giving that to you. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. It's snowballing. I just keep getting these calls. People keep wanting to advertise on Hot and Heavy, and I'm welcoming it. So I will see you on the other side. Pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters. They make your wallet bulge. They're heavy. You never use them. And when you try to take them to the bank, they refuse to help you unless your coins are rolled. But you don't have time for that. That's why you need us, the Rolling Stones. No, not that Rolling Stones. We are the Stone family from Penny, Kentucky, and we will roll those coins for you. So bring your jars, piggy banks, pillowcases, whatever you throw your coins in at the end of the day, and drop them off on our porch, and we will roll them right up for you. All of your change will be rolled with love and the expertise of 5 generations of Stone family bank tellers. In fact, Nana Marjorie is the fastest roller of us all. So if you live near us here in Penny, Kentucky, or are willing to come to Penny, Kentucky, look for our ad in the Penny Saver for more information, including our fees, address, and each Stone family member's favorite coin. Mine is the dime. Oh, it's so cute. You can't get no satisfaction rolling your own coins, so lay your beast of burden on us, the Rolling Stones. Again, not the band. Welcome back. Okay, Elaine arrives in the episode. Elaine arrives at 17 minutes, 24 seconds. We see Elaine for the first time in the episode. She's in the episode for exactly 4 minutes and 19 seconds. It may be one scene, a scene that's under 5 minutes long, but it's a strong scene. If they did decide to air this as the second episode of the series, and this was the first time we saw Elaine, it still would have been a strong showing. She really does a lot with the very little screen time she has. So strong, in fact, that her very first scene is in all those montage episodes, a classic moment in the series. It's the very first scene she filmed. And there is a great anecdote from the extras, it's mentioned, and I've read about it many times. So during the conversation with Jerry, she's biting into peanut M&Ms without breaking the peanut. And in the extras, they talk about they were just setting up the scene, and Jerry and Julia were rehearsing, and she kind of was bragging about that. She's like, oh, I can do this trick with these peanut M&Ms. And Jerry didn't believe her, but she proved him wrong, and she bit into the M&Ms without breaking the nuts. So Jerry's response, very, very dad joke, but I like it. He says, and I quote, "She cracks you up without breaking your nuts." Oh, Jerry. So I love that first exchange. It feels very Elaine. It really does. It feels more like the familiar Elaine that we get to know in later seasons than the Elaine in the Stakeout. But I really like that first exchange. It really tells you a lot about Jerry and Elaine's relationship, how she can just she's annoyed with him, but she doesn't want to not hang out with him, but she doesn't want to really interact with him. It's just great. I love the whole vibe between the two of them. Also, checking your machine, was it as big in the 90s as it is always presented in 90s sitcoms? I do remember whatever machine we had in our house growing up, there was that function. I remember my dad looking it up in the big old, manual about, if you're elsewhere, you have to call your number, and then you have to press star with the code or something. There was some kind of a way to check your messages from another phone elsewhere. But I don't know. I just feel like this has been mentioned so many times in Seinfeld for sure, but other sitcoms as well. It was always like, oh, I need to go check my machine. I need to check my machine. I don't know. I know my family didn't do it very often, but I'm just wondering, was this as big a thing as we see in these shows? Checking your machine. Big deal. While Elaine picks up the phone to check her machine, she finds Jerry's list of excuses for Joel. I love the energy here. It's very, I relate to Jerry here. Look, I'm not a confrontational person, so to me, I believe it. And this is also after he tried to confront him into disastrous and weepy results. So I understand why Jerry made this list. This scene is less than 5 minutes long, but you can feel so much about Jerry and Elaine's relationship. Like I said earlier, it feels more in line with the Jerry and Elaine of later seasons. Elaine calls him out on how infantile the list of excuses are, but then she adds to them. He has no underwear, he can't leave the house, just been diagnosed with a multiple personality. You're not even you, you're Dan. I like the giggly sort of back and forth between the two of them, and knowing that Julia Louis-Dreyfus was sort of known to break quite a bit on set, I'm kind of convinced that the giggling was just sort of a natural thing that happened. In line with feeling more Elaine in this scene, I love that she's so disappointed she never made a man cry. Even with a kick to the balls, that was such an Elaine thing to feel like, wait, I haven't even done that. But I'm pretty sure in the future, either Russell Dalrymple or Joe Davola definitely cried over Elaine. So I think that's in her view. Oh, wait, I just thought of this, and it's not even in my notes. Putty cries. Putty cries on the plane back from Europe, and she's not having it. She hates it. Okay, so don't worry, Elaine. You will make a man cry in the future. Kramer comes in, and Jerry finds out he's gone to the Nick game with Joel Hornick and is just very confused and horrified by that. I do love that Elaine actually likes the pizza place idea where you make your own pie. I don't think it's that bad of an idea. I like that they wrote an idea for Kramer that wasn't so outrageous or ridiculous where you can believe that it would be polarizing. I mean, I understand why some people say it would never work, like Jerry and George. But I also can see folks who would love to go to a place like that and have that experience. It might be like a family place and you all put your own toppings and all that stuff, not cucumber. But I think it makes for a more interesting and believable plot point that this pizza place idea, it's not that bad. And for one, I would totally go to a pizza place where you make your own pie. So then Joel arrives and is super creepy with Elaine. Now, as most of us probably know, Kevin Dunn and Julia Louis-Dreyfus will go on to star in Veep together. In fact, the relationship between their characters, Selena Meyer and Ben Cafferty, is probably the most harmonious of them all on that show. So it's so fun to see them around 30 years earlier in this scene together. I love that. So he's a super creep with Elaine. So even though she gives him a hard time about the excuses, she has Jerry's back. She starts helping him out. Got choir practice, and we've got to get to the hospital to see if we qualify as organ donors. I love that. And then I also love that Joel has a schedule handy, and he just busts that out. So yeah, it's impossible. You're not going to be able to avoid this guy. I've had a very similar situation where I somehow got roped into a friendship that I knew early on. I was like, this isn't going to be something I want to have in my life. And similar to how Joel takes out that schedule and has like 40 dates he's going to be asking them about, or Jerry about at least, I've had similar situations like that with a friend, and it was impossible sometimes to figure out how to tell this person, no, I don't want to hang out with you. This person was exhausting, not in the same way as Hornick, and not to get into too many details, but it was just someone who it felt like a chore to hang out with this person, and they were going through a hard time, and so I felt bad if I said no. And oh my gosh, but it was similar to what Jerry's going through with Joel. And I have to believe, I think a lot of people have gone through something like this where they just have that friend where you're like, oh my God, I never really enjoy my time with this person. And I never reach out to them. They always reach out to me. And then you feel bad if you say no. And if you haven't, you are probably that person. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, my take on the scene. It's really strong. Like I said, one scene for Elaine, but she does, as Julia Louis-Dreyfus always does, she makes it sing with her performance and a fantastic energy that she always brings to everything. I thought it was good. And I love that it feels like a much more familiar Elaine, the Elaine that we all know and love. Moving on to the extras from the DVDs, I just wanted to mention a few things that were included in that. Elaine was originally named Eileen. And that's all. I don't have any. They didn't say why it changed, but it just did. So we could have been talking about Eileen Bennis, but instead they changed it to Elaine Bennis. Michael Richards notes that, again, this is the first time Julia Louis-Dreyfus showed up on set. This was her first scene. And she showed up in cowboy boots, and Michael Richards loved that. And he just said, oh, yeah, that's our girl. Julia Louis-Dreyfus was not a fan of being in only one scene. And I second that, Julia. I totally am not a fan of that either. In fact, that was something early on that she voiced her concern about. Not just with this episode, but in those early seasons, she felt like she wasn't getting enough quality screen time. The book Seinfeldia, which I mentioned a couple of episodes ago, written by Jennifer Keeshan Armstrong, great book. I highly recommend it. She talks about this. Julia Louis-Dreyfus was routinely voicing her concerns. In fact, she talked to the writers about it one day. Larry Charles, Larry David, Jerry Seinfeld. She was in tears and told them that she wasn't being used to her fullest abilities. And while, sure, the face time in front of the camera was plenty, she felt she wasn't given material as funny as the boys. They listened to her and they promised to do better. And what she mentions to the writers, that to me was the fundamental flaw from The Robbery. I mean, not to keep bringing up all my negative thoughts about The Robbery, but I had mentioned that she was in most of the scenes, but gosh, they all seemed like missed opportunities to give her something of substance. So just reading that excerpt from Seinfeldia, I sort of felt validated. I was like, yeah, well, that I completely agree with that. And it was so apparent to me in the Robbery episode. And how fucking badass of Julia Louis-Dreyfus to do that. I would have to imagine in the early 90s, I mean, at that point, I don't think she was a huge star. And she was on a show with all men in the principal cast, predominantly all men in the writer's room, all men producers. She was the lone woman in many respects. And she marched into the office and said, hey, give me funnier shit, you guys. I can do more. And this is bullshit. And I love that. I think this is another reason I just love her and respect her as an actress so much. As I was reading that part of Seinfeldia where she voiced her concerns, it reminded me of the future episode where George and Jerry get their deal with NBC and they're trying to write the pilot. And Jerry finally admits, after Elaine says, I'm not even in this thing, he says, we didn't know how to write for a woman. I think that had to be based on what actually happened here and what they went through in the early seasons, just not knowing what to write for her. And so after she voiced her concern, Larry David went to the writer's room and told all these men to write Elaine as if she were a guy. That advice really liberated them to stop considering her gender as some sort of limitation or actually any kind of a consideration for what her storylines need to be. Julia Louis-Dreyfus had the tools to take any storyline and inject the comedic sensibilities needed while still owning the femininity that Elaine called for. And I'll admit, when I first read that, my knee-jerk reaction to the whole write her as a guy thing, I kind of was like, oh, that's offensive. But I sort of had to take a step back and think about when this was the early 90s and a male-dominated writing staff. And that was what they needed to hear in order to really write appropriately for the show, and more so for Elaine. Now, I certainly don't think it would be phrased that way today. I mean, currently, the whole idea of gender identity and assigning stereotypical traits is very much evolving, and I totally support that. And I'm so glad my kids are growing up seeing a wide range of female characters and what they do on shows. And I should say that for both male characters as well, where not every male has to be some kind of an alpha, watching football, playing golf kind of male character. There's all these shows now are really widening what gender identity means, but not only that, really expanding on the worlds and interests of characters regardless of their gender. So I'm so glad that that's happening. So the whole write Elaine as a guy thing, I mean, it worked. It worked for freeing up those male writers to just write her a story. Don't get hung up on saying, oh, well, it has to be a female driven story or anything like that. And I'll get more into when there are, Carol Leifer comes to mind. There are women who write on the show and they've written fantastic episodes with really, really great Elaine storylines that have maybe a female centric plot, but written in a Seinfeld world. And we'll get more into that as those episodes come along. But for that period of time, that advice that Larry David gave, it helped. And she got really great storylines, and her comedic range really blossomed after they took that advice. And like I said before, I think that's what drew me to Elaine at such a young age, that I wasn't seeing those usual female tropes. I suppose it was because she was being written as a guy, but still bringing that magical Julia Louis-Dreyfus flavor to it. She is one of my biggest comedic influences, and she gave an interview years and years ago, and it was just this little snippet of her take on being a funny woman. And the question that all women get, especially women in comedy, is about, oh, well, don't you feel pressure to still be attractive, but also be funny? And so her response to that was just something that really impacted me. And it's something that I seriously think about it every time I perform, especially when I perform comedy. Quote, "Don't be afraid to look like an asshole. Risk everything. I really mean that. Don't be afraid to look ugly. Don't be afraid to look a fool. Just risk. It's why I can't really watch that Seinfeld dance. I just look like such an asshole and such a buffoon. But you've got to be willing to go there, to look ugly and unattractive, and do that thing to find your way to a true good place, comedically or dramatically." End quote. This advice is constantly in my head whenever I'm performing. Thank you so much, Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Thank you for giving women in comedy the permission to do that, because it's worked for you. It's a proven method, and I just absolutely love it. There was one deleted scene in the extras. It's similar to what already happens in the end with a few changes. Joel is creepier with Elaine. He's just a little bit too touchy with her. And then he finds, I don't know why this makes me laugh so hard. He finds a Katie Lang tape on Jerry's counter and he asks to borrow it. Now I have to listen to Constant Craving. It's a great song. It's mostly the same dialogue. He does mention that he had given Jerry a joke about a serial killer where the killer kills people just to steal their cereal. Anyway, in this version of the scene, Elaine ends up leaving. And then Joel asks Jerry if he can ask her out. And that's the final straw for Jerry. He's like, no, you know what? We're not friends. This is so inappropriate for you to even ask that. We're done. So Joel's like, fine, okay, I guess. And then he leaves. And then he pops his head back and says, I'll see you next week to return your Katie Lang tape. So Jerry doesn't end up getting rid of him in this alternate ending. And that is the last we do see of Joel Hornick. So somehow, maybe not in an episode, Joel actually does take the hint and we never see him again. So that's Male-Unbonding. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I felt like, oh my gosh, there's one Elaine scene. I don't know how I'm going to fill the time, but I was so glad to find that part of Seinfeldia where Julia Louis-Dreyfus talks about how underutilized she was early on in the show and how she voiced that. And I just found that incredibly inspiring. Just so badass of JLD, and not surprised because she's pretty badass in so many ways. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.